In this video, I will cover the anatomical models for the digestive system lab. I'll begin with the torso model. Let's review what you've already learned. The thyroid gland, deep to it is the blue structure, the trachea, the lungs, the heart, and you can see just a small amount of the diaphragm, the darker red structure here. This is the thoracic cavity, and this is the abdominal pelvic cavity. This large organ is the largest gland in your body. It is the liver. You can see the gallbladder peeking out here, the green structure. This is the stomach. If I were to lift the stomach, I would see the pancreas. You can see just a slight section here of the spleen. This structure here is the greater omentum. It's been removed over on the right side so that you can see the underlying structures. These are the small intestines, and they are framed by the large intestines. This section here is the jejunum of the small intestine, and this section here is the ileum. The ileum empties into the large intestine. The first section of the large intestines is the cecum. It's a blind-ended pouch. Between the ileum and the cecum is the sphincter that regulates the movement of the feces into the large intestine and preventing it from going back into the ileum. That sphincter is the ileocecal sphincter, or also known as the valve. If we follow the feces through the large intestine or colon, it will be moving upward here, so we're going to call this the ascending colon. When it goes across, it is the transverse colon. When it begins to go back down, it's the descending colon. In the next slide, we will look at an enlargement of this area here. The ileum is visible here. The ileocecal valve is located here. This is the cecum, and this is the first section of the ascending colon. The ascending colon is thrown into pockets or pouches, and these are called haustra. One pouch is a haustrum. This is the colon that has been removed from the model, so we can see it in greater detail. The structure coming off of the cecum is called the appendix. This is a small section of the ileum. The white structure here represents the ileocecal sphincter. The cecum, the blind-ended pouch. The ascending colon. The bend of the ascending colon on this side is going to be called the hepatic colic flexure or the right colic flexure. So when the colon bends, this area right in here, remember that the liver is located up in here. The transverse colon, this bend here is going to be the splenic colic flexure or the left colic flexure. The spleen is going to be located in this area. The descending colon, when it begins to make an S, is the sigmoid colon into the rectum, and then lastly, the anal canal. Remember that the opening is the anus. This structure here represents the mesentery, and the white structure represents the modifications of the muscularis externa, and this modification or band is called a tinea coli. This is what creates the haustra. This is a lateral view of the tongue. The tongue is located here. Inferior to the tongue is the sublingual salivary gland. Inferior to the mandible is the submandibular salivary gland. In this view of the tongue, you can see the papillae. The papillae are the raised areas of the tongue. These large papillae, arranged in a V, are called the valate papillae. They contain taste buds, and you will need to know which ones contain taste buds. These enlarged areas here, these are the fungiform papillae, and they contain taste buds as well. In between the fungiform papillae are smaller raised areas, and these are the filiform papillae. They do not contain taste buds. They are used for grasping food. Laterally, these ridges are the foliate papillae, and they do contain taste buds. So the taste buds are located in the valate, the fungiform, and the foliate papillae. Back in here is the lingual tonsil. Between the lingual tonsil and the valate papillae is a depression, and this depression is called the terminal sulcus. In this view of the tongue, you can see the valate papillae here. This area here with all these little bumps, this is the lingual tonsil. And the area in between the depression will be the terminal sulcus. You can see some of the fungiform papillae here. There's one right there. There's one there. And in between them will be the filiform. The tip of the tongue is called the apex. Recall that apex always means a pointed area. In addition, I want you to be able to label the muscles of the tongue. I will add a photograph of the tongue model with the muscles identified. In this lateral view of the face, you are able to see two of the salivary glands. The largest ones are the parotid. They will be on either side of the face. And the submandibular. So the parotid salivary gland and the submandibular salivary gland. This half-head model will show you a lateral view of the internal anatomy of the respiratory as well as the digestive system. The frontal sinus, one of your paranasal sinuses, is located in this cavity. This is the sphenoid sinus, paranasal sinus. We'll look at the nasal cavity in more detail in the next slide. The hard palate. Recall that the hard palate consists of the palatine processes of the maxillary bones and the palatine bones. The red area posterior to the hard palate is the soft palate, it's muscle. The peach area here is the uvula, which closes off the entrance into the nasal pharynx during deglutition or swallowing. The lips are called the labia or labium for singular. With the pharynx is going to begin here and run down to here. You'll need to be able to distinguish the different regions of the pharynx and be specific when you're answering questions on the pharynx. Don't just put pharynx, but tell me exactly what region of the pharynx it is. The nasal pharynx is behind the nasal cavity, which is the nasal cavity is this area here. So the nasal pharynx will begin here and go down to about the tip of the uvula. The oral pharynx will begin at around the tip of the uvula to the tip of the epiglottis. This is the epiglottis here. Between the tip of the epiglottis down to here, you will have the laryngopharynx. Continuing down, the laryngopharynx leads into the esophagus. So this is the epiglottis. This here is the larynx. This is the thyroid cartilage, the anterior portion of the cricoid cartilage, the posterior portion of the cricoid cartilage, moving into the trachea. The false vocal folds or vestibular vocal folds, and the true vocal folds here. In this view, we can see the nasal cavity and the tonsils more clearly. The inferior nasal concha, middle nasal concha, and superior nasal concha. The pharyngeal tonsil within the nasal pharynx. So remember, the nasal pharynx is going to be this area right in here. The palatine tonsil here in the oral pharynx. The lingual tonsil at the base of the tongue. This is the tongue. This area here is the oral cavity. From the uvula to the epiglottis, which is located here, you will have the oral pharynx and then the laryngopharynx, which will feed into the esophagus. The labia, the teeth. The space in between the labia and the teeth is called the vestibule. This is an inferior view of the liver, the largest gland in your body. The liver consists of 4 lobes. The right lobe, which is the largest lobe, the left lobe, the caudate lobe, and caudate means tail. This is oriented posteriorly when the liver is in the right position, and the quadrate lobe here. This white structure is the round ligament. The green structure here is the gallbladder. Let's look at the ducts associated with the gallbladder. The hepatocytes or liver cells synthesize the bile. The bile then will move into canaliculi, into bile ducts, and then into eventually the left and the right hepatic duct, which feeds into a common hepatic duct. From there, the bile will go into the cystic duct, taking the bile to the gallbladder where it will be stored. When lipids enter the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, the gallbladder will contract and the bile will leave the gallbladder, go into the cystic duct and into a common bile duct that will enter the pancreas. So we see a little tip here of the common bile duct. This is an anterior view of the liver. The right lobe is noticeably larger than any of the other lobes. The left lobe, the falciform ligament between the right and the left lobes, and the inferior vena cava. An anterior view of the pancreas, the spleen, and the duodenum here, the first part of the small intestine, the gallbladder. This duct here then attached to the gallbladder would be the cystic duct. This is the common hepatic duct. You can see the right hepatic and the left hepatic that feed into the common hepatic duct. So the bile moves from the liver into the right and the left hepatic ducts, into the common hepatic duct, cystic duct to the gallbladder to be stored. When the gallbladder contracts, the bile then goes into the cystic duct and into the common bile duct that will enter the pancreas, and you can see it right here. Within the pancreas, you're going to have a tail. It's shaped kind of like a tadpole, the body, and the head. This is the main pancreatic duct. The acinar cells are going to produce two types of pancreatic juice, one that is rich in enzymes and another one that is rich in buffers to buffer the acidic kind that is entering the duodenum from the stomach. This short duct here is the accessory duct. Where the main pancreatic duct merges with the common bile duct, this area right in here is going to be called the hepatopancreatic ampulla. So that's the area where the bile is going to mix with the pancreatic juices. So right in here. And the duodenum. Let's look at the blood vessels. The superior mesenteric artery branching off of the abdominal aorta. The superior mesenteric vein emptying into the inferior vena cava. Right in here would be the celiac trunk branching off of the abdominal aorta. And coming off of that, you're going to have three blood vessels. We can see actually two of them here. The artery going to the spleen, which would be the splenic artery, and then the blue vessel would be the splenic vein. So between the celiac trunk to this branch right here, this area here is going to be the common hepatic artery. After the branch, we're going to have the hepatic artery proper, and the branches coming off of that will be the hepatic arteries going to the liver. This blue vessel here is going to be the hepatic portal vein. It's carrying blood from the digestive organs, and the hepatic artery proper is bringing blood rich in oxygen from the heart. This is a posterior view of the same model. The spleen is seen here, the duodenum, the pancreas. This is the head region of the pancreas, the body of the pancreas, and the tail region. The gallbladder with the attached cystic duct going into the common bile duct that enters the pancreas. Blood vessels associated with this model include the splenic vein, emptying the spleen, the inferior mesenteric vein, superior mesenteric vein, and this section here will be the hepatic portal vein. For the arteries, you have a little stub here of the celiac trunk artery, the common hepatic artery, the splenic artery, the superior mesenteric artery. This is the microscopic anatomy of the liver. The liver consists of repeating functional units called lobules. They are six-sided structures. This is a lobule. At each corner of the angles, you will have a portal triad consisting of three tubes. The green one is going to be the bile duct. The blue one will be a hepatic portal venule. The red one will be the hepatic arteriole, a branch off of the hepatic artery. In the center of each lobule will be a central vein. This is an enlarged section of a lobule. The central vein would be located here. This is the portal triad consisting of the bile duct, a branch of that, the hepatic portal venule, and the hepatic arteriole. The tan cells are called hepatocytes. These are your liver cells. They are arranged into columns or cords. In between the cords, you will have large capillaries called sinusoids. So you can see one here, but these are also the sinusoids as well. In addition, you will have small canals called canaliculi. You can see one going through here. The hepatocytes are going to produce the bile. The bile will go into the canaliculi and then into the bile duct of the triad. This model is of the intestinal wall, the small intestines. The finger-like structures here will be called villi. Villi is plural for villus, so this is one villus. The function of these villi is to increase the surface area for absorption. The tan cells, located here, are simple columnar epithelial cells. They will be called enterocytes or absorptive cells. The blue cells represent goblet cells. They make up the epithelium that lines the lumen. This area here represents the lamina propria. In the center of each villus is a blind-ended lymphatic capillary called a lacteal. That's that green structure here. In between the villi, you will have areas that dip down, and these are called crypts or intestinal glands. This peach layer here is smooth muscle, and it is called the muscularis mucosa. The layers of the intestinal wall include the mucosa, beginning here with the epithelium and going down and including the muscularis mucosa. This region here will be the submucosa, consisting of connective tissue, blood vessels, you can see some arteries, some veins, lymphatic vessels, as well as some nerves. This here is actually a Peyer's patch. Remember, that's part of your galt. This layer is going to be the muscularis externa. In the small intestine, it consists of a circular inner layer of smooth muscles and an outer longitudinal layer of smooth muscles. This is a stomach model. You can see the esophagus here, which carries food to the stomach. The esophagus will pierce the diaphragm and go into the abdominal cavity. The stomach is divided up into 4 distinct regions. There is a sphincter here between the esophagus and the stomach called the cardioesophageal sphincter or cardiac sphincter. It's known by several names. The area that protrudes above that, this area here, is going to be called the fundus or region. So this is the fundus. The cardio region is going to be located here. The body is going to be most of the stomach. And then the last region is this funnel-shaped region called the pylorus. So you have the pylorus, the body, the fundus, and the cardia. There is a sphincter between the pylorus and the duodenum, and that is located here, and that's going to be called the pyloric sphincter. The folds in the mucosa of the stomach are called rugae. Be sure if I ask you for region, you will tell me either fundus, cardia, body, or pylorus. This illustration shows you the 3 layers of the muscularis externa. So the muscularis externa is modified in the stomach for the grinding that occurs in the stomach. You will have an inner oblique layer, a middle circular layer, and an outer longitudinal layer. In addition, on the model, you will have a lesser curvature here, and this area right in here will be the greater curvature. So be sure that you can identify that on the model as well. This is a tooth model. On the tooth model, you will have to identify 3 regions. Before we get to the regions, let's identify some landmarks. These are your gums, and they are called the gingiva. This is the bone. The first region is the crown, and this is what is visible. So it begins here at the gums. Where the bone begins is the root. In between the crown and the root, at the gum layer, is going to be the neck. The tooth consists of an outer enamel layer. Deep to that is going to be a dentin layer. The tooth is anchored by cementum and the periodontal ligament, which is actually connective tissue. The pulp cavity is located here, and it contains pulp, which consists of blood vessels and nerves, and the root canal. This is half of the lower jaw. You'll need to be able to tell me how many primary or deciduous teeth you have. These are your baby teeth. And what is the full complement for your secondary teeth or your permanent teeth? There are 20 primary teeth, and there are 32 secondary teeth. This is a jaw showing your secondary teeth. So this is an adult jaw. These 2 teeth are your incisors. Be sure that you call them incisors, not eye teeth. I want you to tell me they are the incisors. As we move laterally, you'll have a canine, a premolar. This is your first premolar, your second premolar. These are also known as bicuspids. Then you're going to have a first molar, a second molar, and a third molar. This is only half of the lower jaw. So if you take this number and multiply it times 4, that gives you a total of 32 adult teeth, so secondary teeth. This concludes this video. Be sure that you refer to the list on Blackboard, your study guide, for all of the structures that you have to identify for the practical section of the lab exam. Be sure that you can identify them on all models. In addition, don't forget the histology slides. There's a list of the structures that you need to identify for the histology portion of the lab practical, and there is a video covering the histology slides. I've also given you 2 links for anatomical models with keys. Be sure that you look at those models as well, and you go to your Mastering A&P PAL.